basically Anbu will just walk you through what is we have.
Yeah.
Good for you. So Anbu will just walk you through the text, and then we'll go on to what we want to be presenting. So we'll hand it over.
Thanks. So our main topic is today's polysemy in advertising. So what is polysemy? I think this picture would be enough in explaining this. So it is ideally the capacity of an advertisement assigned to have multiple interpretations or multiple meanings. So in most cases, polysemy is used intentionally in advertisements for various strategical and tactical purposes. So the way advertisement is structured is the message is encoded and it depends on the audience to usually decode it in a way which is very much dependent on the social, cultural context in which they decode it. So in our study, we will be concentrating only on purposeful polysemy only. So polysemy takes up two forms ideally. So the first form is synchronic polysemy. So synchronic polysemy is a form of polysemy in which the same message appeals to two or more group of audiences in a different way. So ideally we have an example for the same. Just over to
ऐसा तो सिर्फ टीवी एड्स में होता है, रियल लाइफ में होती है। मतलब
लगा कोई सा पाएगा ठोका।
गर्ल्स इंप्रेस होती हैं परफ्यूम से और 18+ इसमें है इतना परफ्यूम कि लोग पूछेंगे
कौन सा परफ्यूम है?
18+ नहीं तो LTP।
advertisement they have used the form LKPD as लगाओ कितना भी पाएगा दफा। So actually this appeals to a group of customers as with a different meaning. So this is a form of synchronic polysemy. The next is diachronic polysemy, in which it takes an individual repeated exposure to understand the intricate thing that is intended to deliver from the advertisement. So in this case, as you can see, it's an advertisement for issue. So ideally, this picture is in form of a heart with blood vessels coming in, flowing out. So ideally, the message that is conveyed is it improves vitality. Coming to the form of the reason for polysemy, the first one is the targeting. So ideally this is an advertisement from Rain and Taylor. They had a target of Born with the Best. They wanted to appeal to two kinds of audience. One is the kind of audiences for who idolize James Bond as such, and the other is the kind of audience who took Bond with the literal meaning of bonding with the best. So the second reason for polysemy is positioning. So this is the ad of Punjab National Bank. The tagline they had is the name Union Bank account. So bank is the word bank is used in the context of has two meanings for the same individual, and individual can interpret it in a way to consider it just as a bank, and also it conveys the point that this PNB is actually reliable. third reason for polysemy, which is aesthetics. Most of the ads has this aesthetic polysemy in it. In this case, Sprite has this clear eye. Image it says no purpose, just be clear, which is something which is added just for the sake of aesthetic purpose. This is an extreme form of aesthetic use in which JK Siemens used an ad in which a female just comes out of the beach and says JK, in which you can not relate to anything else other than the aesthetic. This is the final form, which is in which the advertiser doesn't want to have any conceals a controversial or social unacceptable within an ad. Sorry, I'm not explaining this. Paraphrase a very popular YouTube video. It's when there are multiple meanings, it's never one meaning is pagoda, the other meaning is kachori. It's either pagoda and the other meaning is something extremely good. So that sums up the last form personally. So now we come to the point of this presentation, which is the symbolic technique being applied to this. So Saussure and Baudrillard, as we saw in the last class, said that most of these are empty referentials. We saw the example of the cat meaning CAT, and how does that even make sense? So what we are trying to say is that in the case of polysemy, you have symbols that not only make sense and have random meanings, they have multiple random meanings. So take a look at this. It's a bitten apple. It shouldn't really mean anything. But you look at this and you think of premium. So premium to me might just mean it has the most technologically advanced features. It is a really good product. To someone else, it might just mean it's really classy. It might make me look really cool. So the word premium means different things to different people, and it, at the end of the day, it comes down to what you are looking for, and you interpret it in a way that makes sense to you. And now we like to, what is it? It's a T with a blue thing around it. It really shouldn't mean anything, but it somehow means reliable. And this again would mean reliable to someone from India. It might mean nothing to someone from abroad. And what is reliable anyway? Is it reliable because it generates profits consistently for investors, or is it reliable because they are very ethical? So again, these are empty referentials, but at the same time, the same symbol has multiple empty referentials. So the point we are trying to drive at here is that the random meanings that T and the bitten apple actually have, it actually means something. It has some significance only because there is a socio-cultural context due to which most people in this room would probably look at that T and say, okay, that's Tata, that's reliable. It gains significance because we all perceive it the same way. So what we are trying to say is that the salient feature of all this polysemy, of all this why advertising works, is that we have a common socio-cultural context. And that is the source of the problems in polysemic advertising as well, because these social-cultural contexts vary. So again, salient feature of, so the point I was trying to make, it acts as a bridge between recognition, looking at things, and interpreting it. That bridge is essentially the social-cultural context and what you know. And that is handed down to us by society for the most part. And there is this KFC advertisement that we just like to show you.
Yeah, it's a pretty stuck in an awkward situation.
Too easy. KFC's crowd pleaser. A huge variety of delicious chicken and plenty of tasty sides.
So this was a KFC ad in Australia. It was seen as completely normal by Australians because it shows the cricket rivalry between Australia and West Indies. An Australian cricket fan is stuck in the middle of West Indies. This was aired in America, and no one in America knows cricket, and they thought this is a white guy stuck in the midst of a bunch of black people, and he says I'm stuck in an awkward situation. So they thought this was racist. So that is the impact social-cultural context can have in interpretation. The social-cultural context, as I mentioned, is the bridge between looking at something and interpreting it. So again, what determines culture? So how do you interpret this? That is the essence of what we are trying to drive at here. So there are artifacts, which are essentially the advertisements, the things you can see, the tangible things. And these are driven by norms, which in turn are driven by values, and there are some basic assumptions amidst all this, which signifies organizational identity or what they are trying to convey, which, so the difference between a value, a norm or a value and a basic assumption is that a norm or a value can be debated, an organization can change that. A basic assumption is something that they take for granted. Just to give you an example, take Reliance. Reliance has a perception of being, I don't know, a craft company or something. I mean, I'm just giving an example. It doesn't have to be Reliance, it can be whatever firm you want it to be. And then, so the artifact is the organizational identity, the perception of the organization. The norms and values would probably be Reliance asking its employees to give it their all, to say, I mean, you can't flout rules if you have to, just to make an extra penny here and there. So that would be a norm. And what is the basic assumption here? That the company has to make money at all costs. So the basic assumption is driving the values and norms, which in turn are driving the artifacts. So we get back to this later. What we are trying to say is that when you try to evaluate an organization or you try to understand an organization, you typically look at artifacts and try to understand it, when in fact you should look at the basic assumptions that are driving those artifacts. So again, the social cultural variables. Look at this. This is a Budweiser advertisement. It's this guy who has worked really hard and his wife is coming and pouring him a glass of beer. Could you possibly imagine this ad in India? It just wouldn't work simply because alcohol has this stigma around it in India. And this worked in the American context because beer is something that is seen as very casual. And hence if Budweiser were to market in India, they simply couldn't use this ad because they would have to appreciate the variables that exist in India. And even within the same country, there are variables in how we perceive the same thing. On the one hand, you have Khajuraho temple where you have sculptures like the one on top, and on the other hand, we have stigmatized sex and say, no, sex is unacceptable, but it's okay on temple. So there is, I mean, it is paradoxical in a sense, but it is again, it exists. I mean, it is how we Indians are, and any organization that wants to market anything in India would have to appreciate the final social cultural that exists here.
Now we identify the polysemy that exists in the managerial domain. For this, we are trying to focus on polysemy in the product names that come out and the organizational identity and how it is conveyed to people and external as well as internal stakeholders. So for product names, one example over here in indigenous to India is High Design. The company stands for real leather crafted the real way, and it is very high quality. It has tried to position itself as a luxury item, and the name itself is a play on, you can't figure it out whether it's high design as in a luxurious product, a great design, something that you have to pay a lot for, or whether it's about high design as in leather and real leather, which they focus in the tagline also. And from an understanding of Godrilla and polysemy, we can say that the company, the management actually intended to use both these meanings to convey to you what you want to believe about it, because it's in their best interest to convey the same meaning, to convey both the meanings in as short a way as possible. Similarly, Micra, the car by Nissan, it's an entry-level hatchback, and the name comes from the Greek word micros. It refers to the price of the car, which is also very small, as well as the size of the car. And because of this, now here is where we start to draw the social cultural context into a name, into whatever a word represents. The car has been branded because of its small size, as well as the name, which indicates small, to be a women's car. And because women are supposed to have smaller things, cuter things, and that is the social cultural context in which we find ourselves. Similarly, in the managerial domain, now we're trying to stretch it to organizational identity. So we look at organizational identity and how polysemy also plays a role over here. Corporate identity has through the years been very rigid. In the 70s, etc., people were very focused on the logo. The logo became the defining feature of what your company stood for. Over the years, there has been an evolution away from that, because companies have found, and organizational theory has found, that the industry that you find yourselves in, or the environment that you find yourselves in, is very dynamic, and it can have great impacts and repercussions on what your organization stands for. And thus the identity is a crucial parameter where you have to convey a wider meaning or polyphony in whatever way possible. This is employed to add a multiple layer of meanings to the firm's raison d'etre. Going beyond the logo, it also extends to the mission, vision, product names, the value propositions, etc. We can go into examples. We'll go into that later. There's a form content dichotomy in those cases. Now, let's look at Fujifilm. The company earlier was, because it was in the imaging industry, the photography industry, it was actually inhibited when the time came for the digital photography to actually start rising further. The company was restricted in its definition of itself, and thus it has to shift away from whatever it defined itself as. And they shifted away from the logo. That is just a small part of where the cultural identity comes in. But in a broader context, they actually shifted away from the identity of a company which was focused on photography to an imaging company and an information company, and that shows in their divisions internally, that shows in the communication that they put out, everything. Similarly, for Apple, till 2007 the company was called Apple Computer, and till 2007 it was called Apple Computer, and in 2007 they changed their name to Apple Inc. They wanted to shift away from the limited scope of being only a computers-oriented company, and they wanted to add a multiple layer of meaning to what they stand for. Similarly, for Google, I don't have this example on the slide, but for Google, they define themselves as powering the information age, powering whatever knowledge you need to know about the world, they provide it, and that is very broad in its scope, and it can have a multitude of meanings for anyone who wants to interpret it in whatever context they want to. For a researcher, it would be a different meaning from somebody writing an assignment, from somebody in PR, from somebody in social media, because the implications of the meanings are huge. For ITC also, the tagline is enduring value. It can be interpreted in whatever way you want. It can mean that the company has withstood the test of time. It can mean that whatever value they provide will endure for a longer run. It can mean that for India itself, it's a great value addition. For shareholders, it is a great value addition. It's left unclear, and it's left to the interpretation of whoever is making the judgment.
So now we come to the framework that let's consider a case. There's a company X in country A that wants to take over a company Y in country B. So what are the things that are typically looked at when you're considering an M&A? You typically look at economies of scale, synergy, how much money would I make extra after taking over this company. But there are some other things that could impact the success of this deal, which often are not looked at, and for that we rope in polyphony and the whole socio-cultural context that could actually exist. So we call it the what lies beneath framework. So again, consider the whole artifacts. So typically when you take over a company, you look at the artifacts to understand the company, and artifacts could include in the financial statements of the company as well, and the company being evaluated would be evaluated just on that level. But what we are saying is that we need to look deeper. We need to look at the artifacts, the advertisements and the image and the logo, and then you wonder, why does it have this image? Are there any formal or informal groups that are driving this image? And then what are the beliefs and ideologies espoused by the company that have resulted in these norms? And then you think about what are the basic assumptions. This comes back to our Reliance example. It's a company that says you have to make profit at all costs. That basic assumption results in an artifact, results in an image where you think Reliance will do anything to make money, it is a corrupt company, it is whatever. It's a perception. I'm not saying this about Reliance, it's a common perception. So that is an example of how a basic assumption leads to an artifact, and quite often you just look at artifacts while taking over a company. So we propose this framework, and we say that every company should be looking at the basic assumptions while thinking about a takeover. So why do some takeovers fail? Bharti Airtel took over Zen and Zen in Africa, and logically it should have made perfect sense. There were economies of scale, brand name, there are all sorts of things. It made perfect financial sense. It just didn't work. And the reasons for that are many. I mean, Airtel as a company just didn't culturally suit Zen. Zen, apparently the workers are used to taking 3-4 breaks during work hours. The previous group mentioned the India-Korea example and how different the two countries are. It again comes down to social cultural context, and the social cultural context of Zen didn't really suit Airtel, and they didn't really look at that. They looked at it from a purely financial perspective, and they took over the company. And take another example, basic assumption in again Reliance. I'm sorry I'm doing this, but it's a maximize profits, and basic assumption in Toyota is maximize value for all shareholders and stakeholders. And that would include employees, it would include customers, it would include everyone. Any takeover of any merger between Reliance and Toyota will be a disaster. We all know that. Simply because the basic assumptions are so contradictory that they simply couldn't exist as one organization. And so, based on all this, we proposed this. So the traditional framework is just look at business fit, economies of scale, economies of scope, synergies, etc. And we propose a what lies beneath framework where you say look at cultural fit as well as business fit. Because artifacts can often be misleading, look at what is driving those artifacts. And quite often artifacts are polysemic in nature, simply because a company tagline, enduring value, as you mentioned for ITC. Enduring value could mean all sorts of things. So enduring value in itself doesn't mean anything to me. You should really be looking at what is ITC trying to, what are ITC's basic assumptions, what is ITC as a company, what is its organizational identity, and hence then you think about whether or not you could exist as one organization. And then you need a fit of basic assumptions, and that would lead to continuity, and that is what will drive your success if you became one organization. So based on this, we propose a what lies beneath framework for any merger and acquisition. Its roots are based in polysemy, in symbolism, and in the contradiction between multiple messages that a firm might try to convey. And based on this, we say that you look at what they are trying to mean, what lies beneath those messages that are being trying to convey, and then think about a merger or not.